Welcome back, everyone. It's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. We're here today with Katie Cleasby, AJ Miller, and Stephane Rebeck talking about the recent drowning fatality at Ironman Texas in Austin. We're recording this on April 28th, 2026, and approximately 10 days ago, as best as we understand, an individual drowned during the swim portion of an Ironman event in Texas. Unfortunately, this brings us back together once again. You can go back and listen to other discussions we've had about the CrossFit drowning fatality back in 2024. You can listen to a recording we have of Dr. Katie Cleasby's research on lifeguard response times. I'd like to chat with you three today to get your perspective. What came to mind, Katie, when you first heard about this incident in Texas?
We are here today representing Asset Alliance Swim Safety Event Training. All three of us, AJ, Stephanie, and we're missing one as well, Jamie, because of these series of events that keep occurring. It was what opened the idea for my doctorate dissertation to understand why are these things happening? How can we mitigate strategies? And I just thought, gosh, tragic, but here we go again. Something needs to change. We have to move away from the number of lifeguards, the check marks, the list. Do you have certain qualifications for your race directors to meet? Lifeguards who know what they're looking for, distress the cues before they slip under, and working beyond the minimum. I actually just got off the phone 20 minutes ago with a USA Triathlon, and they finished their first version of the course this week, actually. And we're working with USA Triathlon to try to mitigate some of these strategies, as well as what Asset is putting out as well.
AJ, tell me, what was your first thought when you heard about this tragic incident in Texas?
It's unfortunate, but it's kind of one of those things when you have open water swims, there's always potential for that to happen, whether it's a true drowning or a medical emergency. If someone falls on a bike, you can pick them up. And if somebody falls on the run, you can go and scoop them up as well. But if someone goes down in the water, you have to have trained personnel on the water that can recognize that and respond appropriately. I know it's difficult because not all areas have the same resources. I live on the coastline. I have access to ocean rescue lifeguards, and that's what I staff with. But not everyone has that availability. So it's extremely important to the staff that you do have to get them trained up so they can at least be aware of what they're looking for.
Let's go to you, Stephanie. How did you first hear about this incident?
I have a sister who's a triathlete who lives in Texas. She gets a lot in her news feed. I think there's a part of me that's really jaded where I'm like, oh, happened again. And as a result, there's going to be a flurry of activity and discussion around it. People are going to call for change. Change may or may not come around as quickly as we all know that it needs to happen. My initial reaction to stuff like this is anger. It's anger over the way that it shades the industry of lifeguarding. A lot of the people that USAT and World Triathlon, which is Ironman events, put out there are not trained professionals like AJ referred to. Yet they carry the casual term lifeguard. So when people drown, and I will call it drowning, because if you have a medical event on the bike or on the run, someone will recognize you and help. But if you have a medical event in the water, it will lead to respiratory distress and ultimately drowning. Well, I feel like when you're calling those people lifeguards, but they don't really know how to respond, what happens in the industry is look how many people drown under lifeguard supervision. But that's not true. So I think lifeguards take it on the chin because there are other people representing themselves as lifeguards who really aren't.
I think that's such an important point for anybody who's watching who may not come from an aquatic background. In many cases, these events are staffed, air quote, by volunteer lifeguards. There is very clearly not financial compensation in some way to mitigate potential risk of employment contracts or having to have certain lifeguard training plans. It's not enough just to pull somebody with a certification. Certainly, I'm a pool lifeguard. I have no business lifeguarding open water, lakefront, cloudy conditions, or otherwise. And yet some of these event organizers think it's sufficient just to drop a pool lifeguard into an open water setting.
I think it leads to a false sense of security for the athletes. Obviously, the athletes train for this. The swim portion is kind of, if I can bike fast and I can swim or run fast, as long as I can make it through the swim. That shouldn't be good enough. That should be the standard but it's that false sense of security. And also, you got to look at, even outside of these trained lifeguards, the craft that they're on. Do they have the ability, even if they can recognize it, to affect a water rescue, whether it's an open kayak, a sitting kayak, a paddleboard? Do they know familiar with the equipment they're using?
One of the points I wanted to make, and then we'll go to Stephanie, is also the clarity of the water in this incident is a huge point of conversation. I noticed the sheriff stated on a news recording that they had to receive special dispensation to hold this event in this body of water. It is not typically used for swimming because of the cloudy nature. Stephanie?
If they're choosing to be in that, would you rather provide for their safety or not? My difficulty sometimes with events like this, particularly in the aftermath, are all the social media comments. There starts to be a distance from many athletes who've had success in events where they can't imagine that happening to them. They have all kinds of expertise and often erroneous myth advice. Well, all that needs to happen is this, or that person shouldn't have done this. There's almost like a psychological removal of themselves and a victim blaming and an event blaming. I think it really starts at the top. Sanctioning bodies need to acknowledge that putting all of the responsibility for training on the athlete is not sufficient. Even the most highly trained and prepared athlete, such as this one was, such as many others have been, can experience a bad day. It isn't about self-reliance. A lot of things can happen. A lot of things can go wrong in that space. Who is sharing that responsibility with the athletes and the venue and the water safety personnel? I think a lot of times the people who are out on the water think, I just have to spot something if it goes wrong, but there's nothing in their mind to sort of say what happens next. Like AJ said, how do I use this craft for a rescue? Or what happens if I watch somebody go down and they never come back up? Nobody who signs up with their stand-up paddleboard or their kayak thinks that's how their day's going to go.
I do think it's important to mention the athlete's name. This was 38-year-old Brazilian triathlete Mara Flávia Souza Araujo. And the event itself in question, if you're not familiar with an Ironman, it is a swim, as we've been saying, followed by a bike and a run. These are substantial distances. According to reports, she had completed at least 9 previous Ironman events since 2018. So some level of experience going into this. Katie, what do you think the questions about the clustering we've always seen with people swimming over each other? Do you think that has a part to play in something like this, or it's all broadly a water safety plan?
That's a great question. And it kind of piggybacks off of the cloudiness of the water. No matter where you hold the triathlon, these are factors that are going to happen. It's a competitive environment. They try to space it out. We do the progressive waves now. I understand it sounds like Ironman is looking at even more of a slowing down the starts, but it's still going to happen. This hit home for me because I'm 38. I'm a multiple Ironman athlete as well. It could have happened to me, and that's why it's so important. As Stephanie said, it starts at the top in arming these race directors with the information, what to look for. The vertical body position, climbing the ladder, head up breaststroke, they're turning on their back, they're moving away, there's no forward progress. All these cues that you can find from, the dissertation and the study, which came from some of the people here today, the experts who do this for a living, and making sure that knowledge is power. So it is disheartening to look at those comments, as Stephanie said, to see that everybody thinks they have the solution, but it's not a one solution. This is a problem worldwide, multifaceted, multifunctional across organizations. It starts with knowledge and understanding that no matter what, these are Ironmen, these are 1%ers, these are competitive people. You're going to have bunching. This isn't something you can prevent. If you don't like the bunching and you're an athlete, when we do safety briefings, then go off to the side. You might swim another 100, 200 yards. We need to make sure that when these directors, the agencies providing the lifeguards, the water safety support, that they know what to do and how to spot them quicker, faster, all of it.
One of the points I wanted to get your feedback was I read a report stating that there were no dive teams present on site. They had to be called from off-site to do the body recovery. In your experience attending or assisting with these types of events, is that common or uncommon to have dive teams available?
I know that that's a big issue in my area. A lot of fire departments with dive teams are having a hard time finding recertification opportunities. So it's hard to keep their dive teams a part of their agency. Some of them are simply not having dive teams anymore. I have heard rumblings among fire companies that it is really, really hard to maintain a dive team.
Jamie, who is a part of Asset, that's where she is right now. She was invited to this podcast. She's getting recertified, I believe, in her diving certification.
I know there was a conversation about this in the city of Calgary near where I live, but I thought, honestly, as a layperson, it was exclusively a problem to the city of Calgary Fire Department because there was a delay in recovering a body from a lake last summer, and it was alleged to have been caused by either insufficient certification or they only have one dive team and they maxed out their hours. I just thought for an event of this scale, and maybe you guys can speak to this for those of us who haven't done an Ironman, how big is this event and the complexity in terms of organization?
The Ironmans are very complex. I live in Carlsbad, California, in Oceanside, 70.3. It's only a half Ironman, but they're here 3 or 4 days ahead of time, and it's a lot. Well, I have also volunteered as a lifeguard at several other Ironman events. I'll be lifeguarding this weekend at Wildflower. Each one is vastly different. I'm receiving vastly different information. I received a one-page PDF for Wildflower this weekend on what to look for. I received an email from Ironman Maryland as a lifeguard on things that I should look out for. That was it. I've been a part of some briefings before, which is always great, but they're usually 10 minutes before you get on the water, which is not enough, which is why this course we're building with Asset and USA Triathlon will help mitigate some of that educational knowledge that is shared well ahead of time what to look for. It's about timing and resources, and many of them are struggling. They don't have access to lifeguards. They're pulling whoever they can. When I lived in Virginia, I've been an athlete to many triathlons and the local ones. I've been standing at the dock as an athlete and the race directors at the end of the dock asking the local kayakers who were there to just kayak that morning and had no idea there was a triathlon if they wouldn't mind putting their kayak out on the middle of the course to just hang there for the next hour. We must do better. The season goes typically from March, which is the Oceanside North America season opener, all the way usually to November, December. The last one is in California. And we see a big influx, unfortunately, of deaths in 70.3s and all over the world too, not just North America. We need to empower the athletes too. I mean, we're not going to sit here and point fingers either, but something needs to change.
I totally agree with you. I have seen posts in local lifeguard groups, panic posts on Thursday afternoon, Friday morning. We have an open water event here in Alberta, British Columbia. We need more volunteers. And it has always struck me as how respectfully disorganized or under-resourced you have to be that you're leaving such a critical component up to chance. And I presume the event still proceeds even with an insufficient number of lifeguards. What are some of the things the individual athlete can do, being aware of the risks, the pinch points, the problem areas in these types of swims?
That's a really difficult question because when you decide to do a triathlon, typically you're joining a community. And there's a lot of erroneous information that gets passed down through oral tradition in those communities. And someone who's an excellent swimmer, who doesn't have an ick factor in open water, or who has developed strategies for themselves, don't always apply to a person who's new and trying it out. But that becomes their gospel. And I would say there has to be a call from the athletes themselves. And that's going to be difficult because there are some athletes who perceive they need it. And then there are going to be those other athletes who don't need it. So there is this kind of establishment culture, people trying to break into that culture. And what do you do when you try and break into a culture? You assimilate to how other people do it. It's a very difficult thing to change. I don't know what advice I would give to that person. It's just be careful what information you absorb and make sure it comes from a reputable source. And sometimes the race director or club or governing body is not the most expert source.
For the athletes, especially those getting into it, I can't tell you how many people I've plucked out that say, "Oh, I've never swam in open water before." Acclimate yourself. Understand that you can do all the training in the world. If you've never done an actual triathlon or open water swim, people don't realize there's no black line on the bottom of the ocean or the lake for you to follow. Tide is a big one. Especially if you're dealing with colder water. When we do swim workshops or warm ups, I love doing the swim warm ups the day before because I'll get a lot of people that get out of the water and say, maybe I'll just do the duathlon tomorrow instead, because they realize they're not prepared for it. But when you don't get into that open water ahead of time, you don't know what to expect, especially cooler water. You don't know how to calm your heart rate down. You don't know that first 20 strokes is extremely pivotal because that's when your heart rate's going to spike. That's when you have to calm down. They may have never swam in their wetsuit before. Even if they don't plan on swimming in their wetsuit, if they think it's going to be wetsuit legal, you want to get in, you want to see how it feels in the water, how tight it is. Make sure it fits you appropriately. And then practicing your nutrition, training how you're going to race, making sure you don't change anything too late in the game. And really the biggest thing, whether it's a morning or afternoon race, depending on what the water is doing, if there's rougher water, people can't deal with waves blowing into their face. If you only breathe to one side and you're swimming and that wind chop is blowing into you, so every time you take a breath, you can't get one. These are things that people don't really think about before they get into that swim.
The temperature piece you mentioned is so important. I know that was a huge topic of conversation with the death of Lazar Dukic at the CrossFit Games in Texas a number of years ago. One of the considerations was Texas in August, the extreme heat. Even this week in April, it was fairly warm in the state of Texas, approximately 30, 31 Celsius, 90s Fahrenheit. But the athlete in question came from Brazil, another hot country, as opposed to Lazar, who came from Serbia, where the weather conditions might have been different. The water, as you point out, AJ, is a whole other beast because the air temperature could be one thing and the water temperature could be completely another. One of the other things circulating on the internet, I don't want to give too much fuel because we don't have anything substantiated, but there were reports that the athlete who died at this incident in Austin may have been feeling under the weather prior to starting the event. These events are quite expensive. There's a lot of preparation, a lot of costs involved. Can one of you speak to what that might look like in terms of the desire to try and do it, the desire to finish?
I had a conversation with the World Triathlon, a leader in that organization, I want to say a year or two ago. I could be wrong, but I understand that in Japan, they give the opt of the athlete, if they're not feeling comfortable that day, that they are allowed to seed themselves out of the swim and continue on to the bike and run. The other piece of the puzzle in California, in Southern California, we have swim buddies. We have our local events, the KOZ events, and they have swim buddies for every race. And they wear a different color cap and they're in the water and they can't touch the athletes or make forward progress, but they're there psychologically. And we put on beginner triathlete clinics for Tri Club of San Diego once a month. I just did a swim safety talk last weekend. We had 65 brand new athletes attend, and every single one of them said this swim was the most nerve-wracking, obviously the weakest of the three. So much of the sport, too, is lack of knowledge for the athletes. I'm on the board of Tri Club, too, and we have board members who support folks and provide free swim lessons and get them out in the water. I can't tell you how many 20-year-olds sign up for Ironmans and half Ironmans and have never swam, can't swim, never done a triathlon. This is the first time. Then they say, I'm doing Oceanside in 3 months. I need to learn how to swim. Bring me to the Horace Shores. So that's not helping either, right? So it's a multifaceted issue between the swim buddies. What if you could opt out, making it okay?
This is going to come from my jaded sense since 2011. This is about money. You pay for what matters to you. What happens is that no one wants to say, no, we can't take your money. There is this culture of you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, sign up, sign up, sign up. No one wants to say that race can't happen because the safety infrastructure is not there. So there are standards that are intentionally easily achievable so that races get held, athletes sign up, I think, particularly in the case of Woodlands, which is what started this conversation, there is this illusion of safety, like AJ referred to, the false sense of security, because there are boats out there, there are people out there. There's this gap between who's responsible for me, like the athlete Katie described. I signed up, I'm going to do it. Who's responsible for me? You are. But there's this illusion of, well, they wouldn't have it if it was unsafe. So there's definitely this wide open space in the middle where there's this, it's the opposite of a turf war. No one wants to take responsibility for the middle. I didn't train, but you have lifeguards. Or, well, we don't have skilled qualified lifeguards because you're supposed to train. That's where I think there's this gap in safety. I think back to the money, you're going to pay for it either way. You pay for it in paying for skilled supervision, lifeguards, training. You pay for it in races not being held because they're not safe. You pay for it in people not signing up because they don't trust the infrastructure. Or you pay for it in the insurance settlements and the increased premiums that you're going to have when you're paying out death benefits. I just wish someone would say, why don't we pay for the prevention? Why don't we pay for this safety infrastructure? Even if it costs us in other areas, people get out alive. Every family that has a member that signs up goes home that day. That's where my chief issue is, because if Katie talks about pattern recognition, lifeguards recognize patterns. 17 years, I recognize a lot of patterns in the way people respond to having safety at their events. The race directors often, not all of them, plenty of them don't feel comfortable with the standards as they are and do choose to do much more and exceed expectations. But I don't think that's the norm. And I don't think it's possible for a lot of the races to do that if the resources aren't there in their area.
I want to be clear that the Katie in question is Katie Cleasby, who's done all the research on this issue. I will link to our previous chat and her dissertation in the description box down below. One of the things I did want to mention for people who may not have completed Ironman triathlons, I just want to read the distances, because these distances are not for dilettantes. And that was one of the issues I took with this victim being described as an influencer. No, if she's completed 8, 9, 10 Ironmans, she's an accomplished athlete. The distances we're talking about that you do consecutively are a 2.4 mile open swim, which is 3.9 kilometers. As AJ said, there's no walls, open water. It's very, very difficult conditions. Then there is a 112 mile bike ride. That's 180 kilometers, followed by a full marathon. So you're running 26.2 miles or 42 kilometers. This is a significant personal undertaking. Whether you think you can sheer brute force it or not, this is really a lot on the body and on the individuals who are doing these types of events. But are there any other points that you guys want to get to? Because we don't have that much time left.
I think the big thing for me to mention again is, and listen, I encourage people to do everything they want to try and do. Understanding you can have all the safety measures in place. You can have the best lifeguards in the world on that water, but accidents still happen. People can still have medical emergencies. They can still go under. Now you mitigate some of that risk and you improve those chances of having qualified lifeguards. But it's not just that recognition, it's the response after they go under. So having those people, having those resources in place to where it is a rescue and not a recovery. That's a big thing for people to remember. You could be trained up, you can be ready to go and have everything in place, and it could still happen.
Unfortunately, there's so much truth to that. And I hate to say but this is the beginning of the season. We're in April. We have a couple more months to go. Many, many hundreds of races ahead of us every weekend. This isn't the last one, and it's going to happen again. When you asked that first question of what my initial reaction, I hate that. As Stephanie says, I'm jaded. I swim open water a couple times a week in La Jolla Shores. And last Monday, we had a moment of silence for her before we went out and swam, literally behind me in that picture. Everybody's reaction for those who were kind of newbie swimmers, their mouths drop. No, somebody died. Oh my God, that was not my reaction. I hate that wasn't my reaction. This happens. It's going to happen, unfortunately, until we make some systemic changes. And that's why that passion and these incidents that kept happening is why I did my research.
I think one of your points, which is really, really important, I mean, everything we've talked about today is super important, but the fact that there's such a wide network internationally of races, and yet they're not all connected. So what you might be able to effectuate in terms of change in California or Florida may not translate to the organizing committee of a location somewhere else. Here in Canada, I've been following the inquest results, which includes one Canadian male who drowned fatally in Ireland. There was a Ironman a number of years ago, and his family has been very active in keeping his memory in the media, saying he was extremely healthy, technically aware, very proficient. If you've seen any of the footage of the surf on that particular day, they're alleging the race should have been called off. There's these races all over the world, and there's no guarantee that I might be accustomed to certain safety practices at one race that are not carried through at other races. Safer does not mean it's safe.
I think the other challenge too is a lot of these victims' families are silenced. In order to get their insurance settlement, they have to sign an NDA. So we never hear from them after. There's no advocacy or little advocacy from the people who lost a loved one. I can't judge that. That's a really difficult financial decision for a family that loses someone. Inured to this as I am, I always ask myself, like, what's it going to take? How many will it take? How often will it take? Like, when is someone going to notice? And all of these people, this is a collective body of people who have lost their lives. I would love for there to be some unity among the people who've all lost people to triathlon, because that's where the power, I think, would be.
Have there been any reports or athletes who've had drowning incidents that haven't been fatal?
There's a race we do in Daytona every year through Clash Endurance. Out of the two races on Sundays, the sprint and what we call the Daytona distance, we usually pull out about 13 to 15 people from each of those races. Some of them are, hey, this isn't for me, I tried my best. Some of them are coughing up blood. There's
Sudden-induced pulmonary edema.
Thank you. Yeah, sudden-induced pulmonary edema. And that's what we talked about wearing a wetsuit before. The wetsuit's not fully contributing to it, but that constriction can. There are medical episodes that people get pulled off the water for. Any race I do, we want everyone to finish. We want everyone to have a safe race. If you get somebody at your board and you don't think that they can carry on the race, you are 100% have the capacity to remove them from the water, call the jet ski over. Let's get them out, and then I'll have that conversation when they get to shore, especially if they need medical attention.
We have a fair number of pullouts, but not often. I mean, we've had some serious medical emergencies, but that's not the typical. Mostly it's people abandoning. And I do have to train my lifeguards about that and say, listen, just because this is what we see a lot doesn't mean it's what we are always going to see, because we could be really vigilant and spot those people who are really tired and give them options to abandon. One of the things we include in all our contracts is we require the race director to allow any participant who has been pulled from the swim to continue the race. So we now have a reputation for being that kind of confidence building event where if you don't make it through the swim, we're going to provide for your safety, but we're not going to take away your day. We say that because our standards are higher than the governing body standards. So when people are challenging us on the course and they're saying, well, swimming on your back in circles might be race legal, but it is a race hazard and we're not going to allow that to continue. That's just one example. So the people we pull out because they're struggling, we're trying to get to them before it becomes worse. But I do always anticipate there's going to be that one where you're not going to get a lot of visible signs until something's pretty serious. And then you have to respond to that.
Katie, do you have any final thoughts you want to wrap up with?
No, I feel like my last spiel was pretty passionate. Thank you, Katie, so much for the opportunity to share today and to discuss this.
Well, I want to thank you for your time, because you are all very, very busy and very, very involved in many different sectors of aquatics, both triathlon and endurance related, as well as your careers doing all sorts of different things. I think, unfortunately, this is something, like you've said, we are going to have to keep coming back to, because I speak for myself as a lay participant in these events and these occurrences. They kind of fall out of view for me, and then they crop back up. And they kind of fall out of view and crop back up. And so I think, unfortunately, in terms of the advocacy piece, if we can continue to talk about this, people who may think about starting these types of events and knowing what some of the hazards are.
How many more people have to die before we invest the time and the money, as Stephanie said, to make change? How much is one life worth? That's the question. She was an influencer. She was young. She's getting more traction than anyone before. If you go to triathlondeaths.com, it's a Wikipedia, it's a list, and they keep track. And it's significant. 80% of deaths that occur in triathlons occur in the water. And it keeps going up every year. We're going to have this conversation again until something drastic changes.
It's unfortunate, but I think you're right insofar as there has to be sometimes for change to happen, there has to be a figurehead or an individual that people feel a passion and a solidarity with to make that change. And the comparison maybe will seem quite obtuse, but to me it's very apparent as I'm following the Camp Mystic, Texas inquiries regarding the 27 girls, the young girls and the counselors that drowned in the mass flooding in Texas on the Rio Grande River last year, and the absence of safety plans and preparedness and flood warning systems is just astounding when we talk about aquatic professional expectations. Different sector, different industry, but if you give your children in care to a business, if you give your athletes in care to a business that's running an event, what are those expectations and how were they met or not? I want to say a big thank you to Katie Cleasby, Stephane Rebeck, and AJ Miller for joining me to talk about the most recent, unfortunately, drowning fatality of a Brazilian athlete at Ironman Texas in Austin in 2026. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will catch you again in the next video. Bye for now.